Welcome back to another Top 10's Day Wednesday video. In today's video, we're going to discuss 10 of my most hated Magic the Gathering cards of all time. Wizards has created well over 20,000 unique Magic the Gathering cards since the game's inception back in 1993. Not all cards are created equal, and from all of these thousands and thousands of Magic cards, there are some cards that get under my skin. No Luscious Jackson, pun intended. There are some cards I despise. There are some cards I loathe. There are some cards that make me seethe with anger. There are some cards I just can't stand. And then there are the cards on this list. The words and emotions elicited by the following list of cards do not exist. They have not yet been created because the indescribable and existential chasms forged by the presence of these cards cannot be explained adequately. It's hard to play Magic the Gathering when you can't play Magic the Gathering. Keep that mantra in mind as we begin this top 10 list, and you'll see what I mean. Number 10 on this list is Mindslaver. Originally printed in Mirrodin, this awful artifact allows its controller to sacrifice it and then control target player during their next turn. With a converted mana cost of 6 and an activation cost of 4, Mindslaver can be paired with Graveyard Recursion and cast in loops that can lock opponents out of the game, all while watching someone else play with your deck. There's an unsettling feeling about sitting and observing helplessly as an opponent is holding your cards, drawing from your library, casting your spells, using your resources against you, sending your creatures into combat, sacrificing your permanents and tapping your lands for mana, all for the betterment of their own board state and game. Remember, Mindslaver released with Mirrodin in 2003, and the mana burn rule did not change until 2009. Pairing Mindslaver and mana burn during this merciful 6-year period of time made that card much more tolerable than it is now, ending games much more quickly. With some creativity and no interaction, a Mindslaver player can take every turn at the table. Never concede. Make them play it out. Number 9 on this list is Humility. Originally printed in Tempest, this dirty enchantment forces all creatures to lose all abilities and have base power and toughness of 1/1. This reserved list card means it will never be reprinted, and I celebrate that restriction as well as the card's ever-growing price tag. The more scarce and more expensive this card becomes, the less likely I will see it at the table. Granted, a timely disenchant removes this oppressive blanket from the table. However, without interaction and or a fistful of counter magic and protection spells by Humility's controller, which is usually a given, victory through combat will be difficult. A host of angels is useless, a school of merfolk is useless, a flight of dragons is useless, a hive of slivers is useless. Humility removes the soul from combat in a game, particularly if Humility's controller has Urza's armor, Orbs of Warding, and or Protection of the Heckma under their control at the same time. Number 8 on this list is Sawyer of Insanity. Originally printed in Dragon's Maze, this horrible creature makes each player discard their hand at the beginning of each end step. At least Sawyer of Insanity's controller suffers too. For 4 black and a red, it's a 6/4 demon, which is not powerful. However, when a player crafts a deck focused on its resource denial and includes various cards like Black Vice, Megrim, Liliana's Caress, Painful Quandary, Court of Ambition, Waste Not, and Bloodchief Ascension, then Sawyer of Insanity's controller is better prepared to mitigate these losses due to the additional punishment their opponents suffer. Sawyer of Insanity's flavor text summarily describes what happens when this demon is on the battlefield. Its victims become mindless lunatics. It's difficult to play Magic the Gathering when you can't play Magic the Gathering, and Sawyer of Insanity works diligently to limit players' abilities to do so. What a jerk. Number 7 on this list is Urza, Lord High Artificer. Originally printed in Modern Horizons, this ornery creature has a host of abilities for the blue mages. When he enters the battlefield, Urza's controller creates a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token that gets +1/+1 for each artifact that player controls. Urza's controller can tap an artifact they control and add a blue to their mana pool. Lastly, and most regrettably, Urza's controller can tap 5, shuffle their library, exile the top card of their library, and, until end of turn, they may play that card without paying its mana cost. With various ways to create infinite mana, like Basalt Monolith and Rings of Brightheart, a player can easily abuse Urza's last ability in order to cast every spell on their entire deck. If you enjoy watching an opponent take 20 to 30-minute turns through shuffling, exiling, and more exiling, then this is the deck for you. Never concede. Make them play it out. Number 6 on this list is Teferi, Temporal Archmage. Originally printed in Commander 2014, this unpleasant planeswalker can act as a general commander in the EDH format, where he is the most dangerous. Players can build around Teferi in order to infinitely utilize his -1 ability of untapping up to 4 target permanents. With Teferi in play, -1 him to untap Gilded Lotus or Lotus Field, 2 other various mana rocks such as Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, Basalt Monolith, Soul Ring, or Thran Dynamo, and lastly the Chain Veil, which allows the player to activate additional Planeswalker abilities. Additionally, Teferi's +1 ability allows his controller to look at the top 2 cards of their library and put one of them into their hand. This allows the player to build a hand of counter magic and or endgame spells while the rest of the table watches in a prolonged state of paralysis. While building this loop, blue and colorless mana accumulate, allowing the player to recast Teferi from the command zone after he removes his last loyalty counter, primed to begin the tapping-untapping process all over again. As noted, Teferi's controller is a blue mage, so expect a fistful of counter magic in order to protect this combo until the end game is reached. Number 5 on this list is Narcette, Enlightened Master. Originally printed in Khans of Tarkir, this fierce creature sports a very powerful ability. Whenever she attacks, Narcette's controller exiles the top 4 cards of their library, and until end of turn, that player may cast those cards without paying their mana costs. In a deck filled with spells that allow its pilot to take extra turns, string together consecutive combat phases in the same turn, as well as replicating her attack trigger, Narcette is very intimidating at the EDH table. She definitely replaces the whale in my nightmares. Her converted mana cost is a healthy 3 blue, red, and a white, and she is only 3/2. She has First Strike, which allows her to survive some combats. The biggest threat Narcette poses is that she has hexproof, making interaction with her inordinately difficult. This is problematic when her controller is preparing for combat. Even if Narcette doesn't survive the combat phase, up to 4 cards from the top of her controller's library are going to be cast for free. And if the deck is a focused Narcette deck, then it's quite possible Narcette's opponents will not have another turn for the rest of the game. She's that good. She's that mean. She's that odious. She's Narcette, Enlightened Master. And I hate her. Number 4 on this list is Vornclex, Voice of Hunger. Originally printed in New Phyrexia, this horrid creature substantially boosts its controller's resources while simultaneously neutering their opponents. Whenever Vornclex's controller taps a land for mana, they add 1 mana of any type that land produced. This is a personalized mana flare or Heartbeat of Spring. Vornclex is not so generous when it comes to opponents. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Even if an opponent is fortunate enough to remove Vornclex from the battlefield, if they tapped any lands to do so, those lands will remain tapped during that player's next untap step. Vornclex still saw the opponent tap those lands, and therefore they will remain tapped for another turn. Although this interaction does not completely lock opponents out of playing, it is more than a hindrance, particularly when trying to manage lands tapped with Vornclex in play with lands not tapped with Vornclex in play. The chasm-like discrepancy in resource distribution is maddening, as Vornclex's controller basically doubles their mana while their opponents need 2 turns to use their lands. Once. What a jerk. Number 3 on this list is Dovescape. Originally printed in Dissension, this repugnant enchantment punishes players for casting non-creature spells. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, it's countered. Then that player creates X 1/1 white and blue bird creature tokens with flying, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. Typical spells like Disenchant, Beast Within, Anguished Unmaking, and Chaos Warp have no effect on Dovescape because they are countered immediately, replaced by 1/1 white and blue bird creature tokens with flying instead. Nothing short of a creature's enter the battlefield trigger or the activated ability of a permanent on the battlefield will remove Dovescape. Yes, Dovescape affects its controller as well. However, they're prepared for it. No one includes Dovescape in a deck without an advanced and well-thought-out game plan of how to maximize its effectiveness while increasing their opponent's level of misery. Oh, you're playing Is It Spells? Sorry. Oh, you're playing Storm? Sorry. Oh, you're playing Super Friends? Sorry. They're not sorry. Not ever. Number 2 on this list is Jin-Gitaxias, Core Augur. Originally printed in New Phyrexia, this loathsome creature affects opponents' resource management by forcing them to discard their hands at the end of their turns. How? Well, each opponent's hand size is reduced by 7, meaning that any cards in hand by the end of their turn are discarded. As an added twist of the knife, Jin allows its controller to draw 7 cards at the beginning of their end step. Jin's controller has at least 7 cards in hand at the end of their turn, and their opponents have none. It's hard to play Magic the Gathering when you can't play Magic the Gathering. At least Jin's converted mana cost is intimidating at 8 and 2 blue. Jin has flash and is only 5/4, but this is Magic the Gathering, and there are too many ways to cheat Jin onto the battlefield early in games where negating opponents' ability to keep cards in their hands rips away the very essence of playing Magic the Gathering. Jin will never receive a Christmas card from the Burgeoning household. Lastly, number 1 on this list is a 3-way tie among Stasis, Winter Orb, and Static Orb. I refuse to allow each of these 3 despicable cards to take 3 different slots in this top 10 list, particularly because they all do pretty much the same thing. They don't let their opponents play Magic the Gathering. As an alpha original, Stasis is a blue enchantment that forces players to skip their untap steps. There is a pitiful upkeep cost of a single blue mana in order to keep Stasis on the battlefield. Wow, they're really breaking the mana bank on that upkeep cost. Winter Orb is also an alpha original. It's an artifact, and as long as it's untapped, players can't untap more than 1 land during their untap steps. Finally, Static Orb was originally printed in Tempest, and as long as it's untapped, players can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap step. By keeping permanents, such as lands, forever tapped down, the opponents of the stacked player can't play Magic the Gathering. They sit and they watch. Of course, the stacks player comes prepared for ways to tap Winter Orb and Static Orb, allowing their permanents to untap in the process while ensuring that their opponent's permanents remain tapped. The game-stopping abilities of these cards, which completely shut down a game of Magic, are why they are listed at number 1 on this list. Worthless pieces of... That'll do it for this top 10 list. Which cards made your list? Let me know in the comment section below, and don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons on the way out. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.